We are ready to greet the Empress today, and we'll start, as we usually do, with looking at her different titles. In both the Rider-Waite-Smith and in the Thoth Tarot, she is just the Empress. But she's also called, in other decks, she's sometimes called the Queen, or Isis Urania. And I believe the Hermetic title is Daughter of the Mighty Ones. Which Mighty Ones? Do you know?
Chokmah and Binah.
Oh, okay, because she's the path going between Chokmah and Binah. Okay, but we'll get to that later. Okay.
That's right. Chokmah and Binah.
So I guess the first thing we should do is look at the astrological information embedded in the card. And of course, the main astrological attribution of this card is
Venus.
Venus. Lovely Venus. It's interesting because she is our second planet, right? We've had Mercury already.
And the second one in from the sun.
And the second one in from the sun, exactly. There are so many Venus references in both these cards that I guess we should just dive in. Where shall we start?
I think an obvious place to start is the glyph of Venus, which if you look at, actually it's all over both cards, but it's especially apparent in the Rider-Waite-Smith card.
It's almost ridiculously obvious.
Yeah, so it's right there, big and bold, on the heart-shaped shield. The pomegranates of her dress, if you look at the little leafy form below them, they're actually little glyphs of Venus.
They sure are.
Where else is it in there? On the pillow behind her, not the red pillow,
yes,
but the black one has yellow little glyphs of Venus all over it.
That's right.
And there are probably other Venusian references.
There are a
just
lot.
Not the actual symbol itself so much.
Right. There are a lot of things here, natural references like the cypress trees. Those are sacred to
Well,
Venus.
The cypress trees or cypress trees, however you want to pronounce
I think you're right,
that.
it's cypress.
I say cypress. They're really interesting because, so you mentioned that they're sacred to Venus, but they're also considered a funeral tree.
Death, that's right.
There's a lot of death symbolism. They're planted in cemeteries, and they're related to death because I guess if you prune them back too severely, they will not grow back or something like that. But what's even more interesting to me is I actually question whether those are cypress trees and if they're not a specific form of cypress tree called the arbor vitae, which means the tree of life. And the symbol of Venus is the only glyph that encompasses every one of the Sephiroth on the tree of life in its shape.
Yes.
So I actually think that's a reference to arbor vitae, the tree of life, in a very subtle way.
And why not?
But there could be something to the death symbolism too, because we'll see when we get into Crowley's card that death and life are very much both a part of this card. Her position on the tree between the supernal parents, she's often referred to as the gate of heaven. And that goes both ways.
Right. Now, if it is, in fact, a cypress tree, we don't know for sure, but that would also make sense because the island of Cyprus was sacred to Venus. That is her seat. If you read an Orphic hymn to Aphrodite, it always refers to her coming from Cyprus. And also, it is the name of the perfume the sheep perfume, that's French for cypress, which is supposed to be linked to that island and Venus and the herbs and flowers that are sacred to her. And also she's got pearls, which are very Venusian.
Yeah, the Aphrodite rising from the scallop shell. And it may also be a salt reference because she's the next alchemical card. So we already had Mercury, who's alchemical mercury, and Venus is alchemical salt. So the pearls may also be a saltwater reference as well.
Nice. I like that a lot.
Other Venus references in the Waite card. So we've got the pomegranates on her gown, but pomegranates are related to apples. And apples are actually related to roses, another symbol of Venus. So if you look at the leaves of an apple tree and the leaves of a rose bush, that you can see right away that they look almost exactly the same. And if you look at the blossoms on an apple tree, they look like the little wild 5-petaled rose. And if you look at the rose,
theme of 5.
the rose hip itself looks like a cross between a little apple and a pomegranate. It kind of has that little tuft on it. And it's also interesting just to me, and I don't know why they're called rose hips, whereas hips are related in astrology to, Venus rules Libra, and Libra is associated with the kidneys and that whole area of the body. So I have no idea why they're called rose hips, but I just thought that was an interesting coincidence, perhaps.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and if you open up the apple, cross-section wise, you see the pattern of five seeds.
Yeah. Yep, five-pointed star.
Right. All right. So let's look at Venus references in the Thoth card.
Well,
I guess you could say that on her crown, although there's a sort of an orb of dominion on her crown, which is
the orb of dominion. That's a really interesting thing, because look at the shape of the glyph of Venus and turn it upside down.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, even though it is the alchemical glyph for antimony and the orb of dominion, if you turn it upside down, it's a Venus.
Right, and it's also that shape. The glyph of Venus is also an Ankh, a glyph of life. So again, it pulls into the Venusian and the Demeter goddesses of life and creation. She's also, very much just like the Fool and the Magus were two sides of the same thing. She's also another side of the Priestess card.
Yes.
There's a definite evolution between those two cards. And if you look at the Tree of Life, so at the top there we had the Fool and the Magus, and they're very much related and they're opposite each other.
They're symmetrical with respect to the y-axis.
And it's really interesting to look at opposites on the tree. Now, the Empress being on that middle path, she's one of only 3 paths that are completely above the abyss. So it's the Fool, the Magus, and the Empress. The Priestess rises into that area, but is also down below in the lower world as well, and she crosses the Empress's path. And the Empress is one of only 3 horizontal paths on the tree.
Right.
So she doesn't really have an opposite to look at on the tree, but we can look at the paths that she's related to. So if we look at the Priestess and the Empress, you see a definite progression between those cards, the Virgin and the Mother.
Right, or the Persephone and Demeter.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the horizontal paths in relation to her, that's interesting as well, because you have so her opposite horizontal path, you could say, is the Tower.
Oh yeah, you could say that, Venus and Mars.
Love and war. Another name for the Tower card is war, and another name for the Empress card is often love. So you've got a very nice interplay. Just like in astrology, one of the things I really find enlightening often is to look at opposites. So if you want to learn about the 12th house, also study the 6th house.
Right.
If you want to learn about Pisces, also study Virgo. And look at those polarities and axes. And the same thing here. So if you want to know what the Empress is about, also look at her opposite path, which you could say is the Tower.
So if you're looking at your diagram, you'd see that the Empress path runs between Chokmah and Binah, and whereas the Tower path runs between Netzach and Hod down on the bottom of the tree. So you can see how they're sort of symmetrical that way.
And in between them, the other horizontal path is lust or strength. And I think that's really interesting, because if you think of, what would you get if you combine love and war?
That's right.
And
the
lust.
Scarlet Goddess.
I mean, right?
Yes.
It kind of makes sense to me. So, and plus the love and war thing, that's Venus and Mars. Mars is the Tower card, and the Empress is the Venus. So it's just really interesting always to look at your opposites on the tree and in astrology, and there's always deeper meaning there. And another really interesting thing to look at is just the fact that, she's Venus, but the Sephirah of Venus is Netzach. And
right.
You see in Crowley's card, there's some references to that, because you see at the very bottom of the card, there's those little tiny fishies.
Yes.
Well, when you think of fish, I mean, do you think of the death card because of the Hebrew letter that means fish? And if you think of, so the path of the death card runs from Tifereth to Netzach.
Right. That's true.
And so there's another life-death thing going on, just like we had the cypress and the arborvitae trees. We've got a life-death theme here. And even in the Book of Thoth, when Crowley speaks of this card, he says Isis and Nephthys. So Nephthys was Isis's sister and is associated with the underworld. So it's kind of very interesting that life and death are both evident in this card. I mean, this card is often, you just say, oh, pregnant lady, birth. But I mean, there's a whole lot more to it than that. And there's a lot of creativity, and there's also that other side of life, that part when you're born, death is part of that experience.
That's right. And also, we've talked a little bit in the past about the polar attributes assigned in the Kabbalah to the double letters, like Daleth is a double letter, and that's the correspondence for the Empress. And that, what goes with that letter is peace and war. Again, that
interesting. Yep.
Venus and Mars kind of juxtaposition or confrontation.
Another thing about the fish reference may also have something to do with her consort, the Emperor. So his letter is Zadi, which means fish hook.
Right.
So it makes me wonder if that's yet another reason why for the fish reference on her card. Plus, fish are associated with fertility and...
Oh, and there's one other important thing. Astrologically, Venus is exalted in Pisces, isn't she?
Yes.
27 Pisces.
Exactly. So there's yet another reason for the fish. You may never know exactly why, but maybe it's all of those.
It could be all of those things. This is symbolism, belongs to everybody. Choose what you like and use it. Oh, yes. And also blue lotus, blue flames on the Crowley card. That's, again, that reference to Aphrodite rising from the sea, from the testicles of Uranus, right? That sounds terrible. From the testicles of Uranus, the sea foam forms on the sea, and Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, arises out of that. Hence these sort of blue flame images to either side of her, and, of course, the fish as well.
I think Crowley says something about the lotus wand as being the roots beneath the water, but the top open to the sun.
Ah, yes. That's interesting.
And it's associated with Isis as well. And her crown, it's Isis and Hathor both wore that kind of crown.
Yes, it's sort of like the solar disk crown, only it's...
Got the orb there of the... And you know what's interesting about that cross on the orb now?
It's a Maltese cross, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an equal-armed cross, and I kind of see also the supernals there. Her, the three supernals, Keter and Bina and Hakma there. I don't know. It could be. It looks very reminiscent of that. Then there's the archway behind her.
So that's a reference to Dalet, right?
Which means door. Her name as the gate of heaven. Again, the door, the path between the two supernal parents.
I love that about this card, the idea that she is a doorway between life and not life, like that. In the continental tradition, they assign Gimel to the Empress, which is also, you can see it that way because the camel brings life and, across the barren desert. But I particularly like that association of Daleth and door because there's just something that's so primordial about that threshold that we all go through, and especially the idea that she's not just the doorway between life and not life, or life and death, but she's also this channel between the pillar of force and the pillar of form. I think she's like the Lincoln Tunnel.
On a literal level, it also adores, the womb itself.
Exactly. Well, we should perhaps talk for a second about mother, double, and single letters. I know we've mentioned it before, but the mother letters, of course, are Aleph, Mem, and Shin, and the double letters are the ones that were supposed to have a double pronunciation, hard or soft. But that's why we have these polar attributions like life and death, wisdom and folly, peace and war. Because we have 7 double letters, we associate them with the 7 planets, which each have these sort of double powers that we look at each time. Yeah, let's do symbols before we do color and alchemy.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so we've talked about the pomegranates, we've talked about the trees, whatever they are. We haven't talked about the wheat in the Rider-Waite-Smith, and that could well be a Demeter reference.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because, the maternal harvest of Demeter, and again, emphasizing her relationship with the previous card.
There's also the waterfall behind her there on the right of of the card.
Yes.
Which I have heard refers to, it's a priestess reference, actually.
Rivers.
The rivers coming down, the primal waters of Eden descending.
Weren't there supposed to be 4 rivers of Eden, something like that?
There's
and then they
something like
descend
that,
from the high
yeah.
priestess to past these trees of possibly life.
And I also wonder, see how there's the cypress trees or the arborvitae trees, and then there's that other more deciduous-looking tree there. And I wonder if there's any reference to the tree of knowledge. Eve is associated with this card, both biblical Eve and mitochondrial Eve, the mother of all. So it could be another, Eve reference there as well.
I just think it's so interesting. I did a reading for a client yesterday, and she drew this card. And I think what's so interesting about dealing with Venus and in the Empress card is because you're dealing with someone who is a wife and a mother. There's essential overtones and emphases with the card. The idea of Venus as the counterpart to Mars, as the desirable Venus, as the affectionate, loving Venus. But there's also the generative, maternal force that continues to produce, continues to grow, no matter what you do. I mean, that she cannot help but be the power of fertility. And it's interesting because as women today, we sometimes, see a fight between our wife and mother roles. And I think sometimes what makes this card so powerful for women when they get it is that she combines those things into one incredibly powerful image.
Yeah, there's something about the card, back to the relationship between love and war, the Tower and the Empress, one tears down and one builds up, one nurtures and gestates, and the other one, clears everything away. I think a lot of times this card comes up and people feel very limited by the definition of just wife and mother. And they're like, well, how does this apply to me if, say, they're neither a wife nor a mother, or if they're a man, or if they just don't feel that type of maternal quality within them. And there's a lot of creation to it that is more than just creating, birthing. And
exactly,
there can be the birth of an artwork and all the creativity that you can nurture and grow. And it's done in silence. There's a lot of the being in the womb is a very silent, and you're not talking about something, you're doing it, you're nurturing it until you're ready to, an artwork. You're not out there talking about it, you'll kill the magic. You're waiting.
It's like messing around when a seed is growing.
Letting it gestate, letting it do its thing, and taking care of it in the meanwhile. So I think there's something to the creativity aspect of this card that the Shakti, energy that is often overlooked. And
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, Venus is the goddess we look to in the arts. So often we associate her with beautiful things of all kinds. And I remember the very first tarot reader I ever went to, was talking to me about the 5th house of astrology, where children are, and saying, your creative projects are your children too. And that's what I think of with this card, that that all creative things come, that is a form of motherhood as well, to create things from your mind and your heart and your soul, not just from your body.
Another thing, in the Book of Lies, Crowley says that this card represents one aspect of the great work: to receive and accept all impressions, not to let them dominate you, but only to fructify you.
Interesting.
So there's that receptive quality, to take in something and let it penetrate you in order to grow something from that experience.
Right. So sort of the equation of the feminine with the receptive again in this picture. What about the double crescent moons? I know you know a lot about that. So what's up with the moons? Is that just like a feminine versus solar masculine thing, or what's going on with that?
Well, I think there's a lot. Whenever you see the crescent moons, especially when you see them in both directions, there's often a fluctuating force. I also wonder, and you always see these referred to as moons, so I could be totally off base, but you do know that Venus is one of the only other planets that we see its phases. So if you have a telescope and you look at Venus, you're not always seeing the same face. It actually has waxing and waning and crescent, phases. So I always wondered if those were actually the moon or if they were actually phases of Venus. I always see them referred to as the moon, but
Yeah, I see what you mean. And maybe it has to do with, it could also have to do with the moon's influence on the waters, perhaps.
And you see how they're each of the lunar crescents are in a circle within a circle. And I don't know if that's a relationship to the solar glyph or if it's more like an egg, like a zygote,
I always think it looks like an egg.
Kind of looks like that. So I'm like,
Right. And she is facing what we would call here in the Northern Hemisphere the waxing crescent.
And that one's larger. The outer circle of light around that one is larger than the other one as well.
Right.
So if you just divided the card in half, I think somewhere, I don't know if it was Snuffin, someone mentioned that the fact that that side was larger and she was facing that side had something to do with that the new Aeon was bringing in the energy of the white eagle, whereas the pelican symbolism, which we haven't even talked about yet, was more of the past,
right,
and was fading away.
What about her belt? I believe it's got signs of the zodiac.
Yep, signs of the zodiac.
Is that a girdle of Isis?
Girdle of Venus. Yeah, one of the. If you look at the magical weapons of Venus, it's the lamp, the girdle, and the rose. And you can actually see a little rose in this card in between the shield and the pelican down below beneath her. There's a tiny little rose. So I don't see the lamp on here, but I do see the other two weapons of Venus.
Perhaps she is the lamp. The zodiacal belt could be a reference to her cyclical nature, the cyclical nature of fertility, and the way it returns and leaves.
And it could also just be a reference to her position on the tree. I mean, Hakma as being the zodiac, and then Bina is the side. Well, it's traditionally Saturn. There's also, if you look at the Masonic pillars, which you'll see in the priestess card sometimes if you look at illustrations of those, you'll see the Hakma pillar has a globe on the top with the belt of the zodiac around it. It's like the celestial globe. And the other one on Bina's side has another globe, and it's the earthly globe. It's the globe of the earth. So even though that's the Saturn Sephira, Earth makes sense.
Saturn
because
and Earth,
the mother and the daughter,
overlapping.
There's the universe card that's
the Bina
that's
Malkuth
both Earth
connection.
and Saturn. Yeah, the Bina Malkuth, the mother and the daughter. So I think it's really interesting that you see that on the two pillars, and she's in between them. So it just makes me wonder if that's a connection between the zodiac and the Earth.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, shall we talk about the pelican?
Oh boy, the pelican. Yeah. There's the whole self-sacrifice theme.
Right, the idea that the pelican nourishes its young with blood that it's giving from its own breast. That's so depressing.
And I've also read that there's some other mythology where the father pelican kills the baby pelicans, and then the mother resuscitates them with blood from her.
It's a horrible world.
Yeah, and then there's it's a Jesus Christ sacrificial thing, and we'll see in the next card, the Emperor. There's also a theme of the sacrifice. A Jesus Christ sacrificial. The lamb in the other card often has that same theme.
I think it's interesting that that you have associated with Venus both the swan iconography, not in the card, but I mean in general, swans and pelicans. Again, that sort of distinction between, her sensual role as a lover and her role as a mother and, nurturing her children.
When I see this card, another thing I always think of, so you think of Mother Nature, right? But there's that Tennyson poem.
Red in tooth and claw.
Yeah, nature red in tooth and claw. And I always remember that Venus has her vicious aspect as well.
She does. She can be incredibly destructive. And, I think about that. If we ever get to do the minors, I love thinking about that in terms of the Seven of Cups, the Venus in Scorpio, where she takes things and transforms them into, decay and ruin so they can grow again. So, yeah.
The whole terrible mother thing.
Yeah, right. I did want to talk about the symbolism in the Waite Smith card, the Revelations symbolism, because that's something that everyone sort of refers to, but we never really look at that closely. So I actually took out my Bible and found Revelations 12, so we can actually read that reference. So this is Revelation, chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. So that's actually verse 1 and 2 of Revelation. And wow, that sounds like the Empress. The 12 stars on her head, you can see them right there. I believe they're 6-pointed stars. So whenever we see a 6-pointed star, that's a heaven and earth kind of reference, right? And perhaps at her feet, perhaps the water in the Waitsmith card could be...
Yeah, the moon at her feet thing is usually in the priestess card.
Right.
And I think it's just yet more evidence of the conflation of these two, Isis, Hathor. They're often aspects of the same goddess in a sense.
Right.
She's got the 12 stars. The priestess has the moon at her feet, and I always think of the lust card as being clothed by the sun. Right. So it's almost like the imagery has been split between those three cards in a sense. Yeah,
because the Babylon imagery, is that from this, refer to the same verse?
Yeah.
It does. So
then we've got the dove and the sparrow in Crowley's card. More Aphrodite
references.
I think somewhere Waite refers to the dove as desire and wings thereof.
And he also often makes reference to the dove and the serpent as kind of counterparts, which we'll see later in the Hierophant.
The dove and the sparrow are supposed to refer to sex and love.
Really?
Yeah, I think
that's interesting.
The dove as love and the sparrow as being very prolific. Well, we've got the alchemical references here. So we mentioned that she's the alchemical salt, and you see in the Crowley card that her posture is that, if with a little imagination, you can see her posture is intended to be that of salt. So the salt glyph is a round circle with a horizontal line through it. And
it's like a sideways power button.
Yeah, exactly. You can see her body is very round and her arms kind of bring in that horizontal line. The other really cool thing that I don't think is often mentioned is that her arm there, see the kind of, one arm's holding the lotus wand, but the other one is kind of in this rather awkward looking position.
Yes.
It's as if she's cradling an infant.
It is as if she
there.
is.
And that particular position is called Mater Triumphans. So it symbolizes Isis holding the infant.
I see. Right. And of course, salt in alchemy is the passive matter.
Matter which has been energized by sulfur.
We'll be getting to the sulfur shortly. That sort of ties in. You can see why salt would be the association for the Empress, that receptive quality, that sort of material potential that can be activated.
Then down below we have the fleur-de-lis there, several of them, which, can you guess what that means?
Is it a phallic reference?
Phallus in the yoni.
That's right, because lilies,
Yeah, of course. Of course it is.
Because we haven't had a phallus reference yet. It was time.
And then, of course, there's the white eagle on the shield.
So that, as I understand it, the white eagle of alchemy represents the raw, natural potential before it's refined into by the artifice of the alchemist.
So it's the white tincture that is the lunar force, the receptive force, to the counterpart to the red tincture, the solar force that we'll see in the next card.
And it's really interesting how they did that when you think about how, there's always been a shield with a bird on it on these cards, even, stretching way back into the Marseille tradition on both Empress and Emperor.
Except here they're two-headed eagles, which I think in those they're single-headed.
They are.
And in the two beaks, they're holding, I think, a crescent moon, but it's also, again, it's within the circle. So again, is that a solar reference, or is it an egg, the nucleus of the egg?
It looks a lot like the waxing crescent above it.
And it almost, now I don't know if I'm seeing too much into it, but that almost looks like the glyph of Venus. So you've got the round circle there, and see the body of the eagle, and then the legs kind of form the crossbar in a sense.
This is the Thoth card shield with the double eagle, there's a sort of a circle around the heads of the white eagle, and then there's just definitely a vertical component there, and then perhaps their feet or their nest or something like that crossing it.
Another thing I read about alchemy is that the pelican is the opposite or antithesis of the raven. So the raven in alchemy is often a death
Yeah.
The morte, the
Memento mori.
the black, the blackening phase.
Oh, yeah,
Whereas
nigredo.
the pelican, that's the word I was looking for. Whereas the pelican is said to be the opposite phase of that. So
Right.
for what that's worth, again, more life and death.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to really.
Juxtaposition.
We don't really talk about this much in tarot, but the three major components in alchemy are sulfur and salt and mercury. So that creates a group out of the emperor, the empress, and the magician. We don't really think of them as a trio very often, but they have this connection. And what is the role of the mercury in the... we know that the salt is the passive matter, the sulfur is the activating. Is the mercury that which travels between them?
It seems like a very fluid force, the whole quicksilver symbolism.
Right.
A mediating force, perhaps, between those two.
Okay, so much for alchemy. Oh, color. We should talk about color.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so, do your thing. What are the 4 colors of the Empress?
The king scale is emerald green. And then the queen scale, I think, is sky blue. The prince scale is like a pale green, and the princess scale is a rose rayed with pale green.
Got it. They call the pale green the early spring green, and bright rose or cerise cherry rayed pale green. Now, when we're talking about the colors of the Thoth deck, we're talking about Winsor and Newton colors, right? So Winsor and Newton,
right? The color names on their tubes of watercolor paints that Harris was using, and I think Morna Mathers used as well, and she came up with the scale, I believe.
Right, and because we would like to think that they, that there was some kind of occult reference in the names of the colors, but in fact they're just paint names.
So those colors, the pastelly, both emerald green and spring green, and the blue and the rose are all very much in evidence on the Crowley card, the Thoth card. Not as much in the Waite card. I see an awful lot of yellow in that card.
It's very yellow.
It's very yellow, some green, and red.
It feels much more harvesty, fruit and grain kind of thing than
totally.
Whereas the Crowley card is such a vernal spring type card, whereas the Empress feels almost like it's on the other end.
It's very
like Taurus
soft.
versus Libra.
It's much softer and
and it's interesting. The green plays such a strong role in the Crowley card because, of course, green is the color of Netzach, as Venus as a Sephira.
Yeah, and green is the middle of the color spectrum.
Exactly,
the mediator.
Exactly. Isn't it the case that aren't we supposed to perceive more shades of green than any other color?
Yeah, I think I've read that as well.
I've read that. Yeah.
And it's a very soothing color. That's why the green light, they use that to mean safety, even though it kind of encourages you to linger instead of go, so there's a little bit of mixed message going on there with stoplights. The red encourages you to run away, and the green encourages you to stay and linger. But I think the idea was that green is safety and red is danger.
Yeah, I always feel slightly
love
panicky
and more
when I see a red light. Well, that's interesting. And when you see the Waite Smith Empress versus the Crowley Empress, they really do have the Crowley one feels like there's more, like it's more of an emphasis on potential and newness, whereas the Empress one feels more like birth harvest, and completion. Yeah. I mean, you could think of that as the beginning and end of the growing season, Taurus and Libra.
Her scepter in the Waite card, to me it looks like an ear of corn.
Yeah, me too.
Good.
I never really realized that, but the minute I looked at
and
it,
it also
instantly...
looks like a mahl stick. I don't know if you're an artist, you know what a mahl stick is. It's like a round padded end on a stick that you use to lean against your painting so that you don't drag your hand into your wet paint when you're painting.
Oh, great.
But I'm sure it's not that, but again, creativity, and it makes me think of that when I see it.
Yeah, right.
It's like an ear of corn and a mahl stick.
Why not? Okay, so that leaves smells and notes, I think. So I
that's all you.
I have so many different smells because Venus, of course, is kind of a patron goddess of perfume, and she has many smells associated with her. I have sandalwood. Oh, I didn't bring down my rose, unfortunately. I'm almost out of my good rose. I have only a skanky rose right now. Oh, it's ridiculous. I just ordered more, but it's not here yet. I have patchouli, which I didn't realize is associated with Venus. I have oak moss. These are all really earthy base notes.
Which one should I start with so that I don't... Probably not the patchouli, right? Because that'll kill the smell of everything else.
kill the smell of everything else. I would just
Start
choose
with the
one.
oak moss.
Yeah, I love the oak moss. It's got this inky forest floor thing happening with a little bit of an iodine thing in the background.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Iodine for the salt.
Yeah, there you go. I always think it feels just a little bit like there's a fishy seaweed thing just in the background, but it's quite subtle. And Venus, of course, was classically
Sandalwood.
Considered an earthy planet. Sandalwood, love sandalwood. Virgos love sandalwood, they say.
I love sandalwood, but I have a lot of Virgo in my
That's
chart.
true. Well, we know what patchouli smells like. We don't need to blast our blast our senses and become unable to smell anything else. But okay. And the other thing, oh yes. So this is interesting. The musical note associated with the Empress is F sharp. And you know what's interesting about F sharp? It is, so as we were saying, green is the middle of the spectrum, right? Which means that F sharp is halfway between C and C. And that interval is the augmented fourth or the diminished fifth. That is exactly divides the scale. And that interval was considered the devil's interval in medieval times because it's weird. It doesn't belong. If you go up one tone, that gives you G, which is a perfect fifth from C. But from C to F sharp is just shy of that, and it makes us uncomfortable and it makes us feel weird, and that's the note.
That's actually interesting because there's some association with Venus and Lucifer.
Interesting.
You
Yeah.
know, the morning or evening star aspect, the light bringer.
Curious.
For what that's worth.
For what it's worth. And the idea that
And the devil
the
is
devil,
the lord of the gates of matter, whereas she's
salt.
She's a gate of heaven.
She is
and
a gate
she's
of
salt. So I think there is some relationship between the devil and the Empress.
and then there's the dove and the serpent and the and the apple. Yeah. So, like
Apple
it or
of
not,
Eve.
the devil is part of this story. Okay, so that was the Empress. Thank you for going on this journey with us, with the Great Mother. And we'll be moving on to the Emperor next time. So brace yourself for Cardinal Fire and the King of Rams.